Yeah, we're live. 12 or 12/19. That's the date. Is 7/22. Hopefully everybody's doing well. Tonight I want to talk about stock cylinder heads. And the photo that I have up is actually stock 5-liter Ford heads. Really, this discussion will apply to almost all of the stock heads, with the possible exception of the LS engine family, and particularly some of them, the LS3 obviously, and the LS7, because even in stock trim, those things can make a ton of power because they flow really well. You could make lots and lots of power with those. But for the most part, particularly, let's talk about pre-LS times. Let's talk about the stuff that happened before that. Let's talk about 5-liter Fords and 351 Fords, whatever size you want. Doesn't matter. They use the same head. The small block Chevy stuff, the Dodge Magnum and pre-Magnum LA stuff and intermediate stuff in there. None of them had good heads. And the part of obviously the power potential of the motor, part of that's dictated by the cylinder heads. So if you have good heads, doing the other stuff is very easy. That's why when we look at an LS, even the cathedral port stuff, flows fairly well. It flows enough to make, we probably could make 500 horsepower with cathedral port heads if we really applied ourselves with the stock cathedral port head, particularly the 799 or the 243 head, because those flow a little bit more and then have a little better chamber design than the 317 head, which flows fairly well. But with the rec port heads, we've made almost 700 with an LS3 head. Probably could make even more with an LS7 head. So those things will support a lot of airflow. But the stuff that came before that, not so much. So we take a look at the way to judge the head right off the bat. And this is, remember, this is, excuse me, this is by no means, in no way is this absolute. But when I look at cylinder heads, I do an easy multiplication. So I take the stock flow rate, the maximum flow rate of the cylinder head, and there'll be reasons why this doesn't work. But if we take the maximum flow rate and multiply it by 2, we get a reasonable estimation of how much power it can support. So if we have a 300 CFM cylinder head, we can make 600 horsepower. And we've done that before. In fact, some guys have gone beyond that. So they're making 2.2 or 2.3 horsepower per peak CFM. Obviously, that assumes that you have a camshaft that's taking advantage of where that head is flowing. So you're utilizing that maximum flow potential. What the rest of the airflow curve looks like is very, very important for maximizing the power output. And then obviously the other things that are going on with the motor also determine whether or not your motor can take advantage of what the cylinder head has to offer. Because it's not just the head. If you put 600 CFM heads on your motor, like we have on an LS3, you make 500 horsepower or actually less than 500 horsepower with a stock camshaft and stuff, because you don't have the motor to do that. So the motor and the head flow potential, those things you got to work on both of those. So if we look at a stock 5-liter head, let's say that those flow 160 CFM. If we double that, okay, we can make 320 horsepower from a stock set of heads. Can you make more than that? Yeah, like I said, we've made more than that when you have to really go after all the rest of the combination. The reason that I bring this up tonight is that I get lots of comments from people, particularly when I do, shootouts or whatever, comparisons of camshafts or small block Ford camshafts or intake manifolds or whatever. And they're like, yeah, but that doesn't do that with they're a little bit of attitude. It doesn't, the cam's not worth that. Cam's not really worth that, not with stock heads. It's not. That's absolutely true. That if you do that cam swap that I just did with airflow research heads and a good intake manifold, and we do the stock cam versus that cam, we got a big amount of power, like we do with an LS. Take a stock cam out and put a good cam in. We have all the other things, so the camshaft's worth a lot of power. On the small block Ford, it's not. And I showed that in the video where I tested 224 cams on a small block Ford and an LS. We could see the big difference there. And the reason is because it's not because the cams aren't any good. Because even if you put an exact duplicate of the camshaft in, the camshaft still has the potential. And so, but a lot of people mistakenly think that, no, the cam doesn't do that. Well, it does, but you have to have the other things to take advantage of that. It's like if it's like what's a 1,000 CFM carburetor worth? Well, it's worth 300 horsepower if you put it on a 300 horsepower motor. But if you put it on a 1,000 horsepower motor, it could make 1,000 horsepower. So, the other things come into play here, and because the camshaft didn't make as much power, doesn't mean that the camshaft is at fault. When you're testing it with stock heads, or that the dyno testing is suspect or whatever. None of that is true. What is true is that when we do that, when we run that camshaft and we're limited by head flow, then we need to get rid of that limitation. So if we're trying to, max out power production with a stock head, you have to do the other things. Like what I did on mine is we use those stock heads on a big motor, use it on a stroker motor, 392 or 393 inch motor. And we made a lot of power. We made 386 horsepower with those stock heads. But the only way we were able to do that is basically what we've done is artificially increase the airflow by having more draw on the cylinder head because of the bigger motor. So in essence, we're not testing it. We're not testing the airflow anymore at 28 inches. We're testing it at way more of a depression there because it's the motor below that is sucking the cylinder head for all it's worth, collapsing it in. Basically, we're creating a negative singularity there. So you can do better than that, but you have to do a lot of other things to the motor. Like we just made it bigger. We put a big cam in it. It had more compression. We put a big intake manifold on it. We put all the other stuff on it. And so you can get more than that. The other way to do that, obviously, would be to, you could port the head and then improve the flow rate of the head. So now it flows more. And so now the relative number is different. But you could go up on quite a bit of power keeping the stock stuff. But when we do a cam change, like on the Ford, we put the 224 camshaft in there. I think we got 30 horsepower, or 32 or 33 horsepower, whatever. That's a pretty good gain. But the limitation is not that camshaft, because when we went, we picked up 30 horsepower or whatever, and it was making a little over 300, let's say. Okay, that's great. We already know that camshaft, we've made way more than 400 with that camshaft. So we know the camshaft will support that much by itself if we have the other things that go with it. And so, and this is a hard thing to get, it's a hard thing to get people to understand, is that, well, that, we tested it, it didn't make anywhere near that much. I know you tested it on a different motor. You tested it on a stock one. You didn't test it on a modified one. And I think that's why when I do a lot of this testing, sometimes we test it on stock things. But like when I did the cylinder head test, we didn't want to do the cylinder head test on a stock motor because it won't show what any of them do. The people that want that are looking for a specific, they're looking for like specific results. They want to tailor the results to the thing that they want to see. Well, I bought GT40 heads. I don't want to buy airflow research heads. You need to test that on a stock motor so that then I can feel better that my GT40 heads, only lost 10 horsepower or 5 horsepower or whatever to the airflow research head because the motor wasn't taking advantage of either one of the heads. But they get to feel better about themselves. So, and the other issue here is like, cause I get people that ask about, okay, well, can't you just, let's just max out the stock heads. Let's just do as much porting as we can on the stock heads to try to get as much power as we can just using the stock heads. And here's the problem with that. You can indeed port stock heads, any stock heads on any motor. You very rarely I don't know of any stock head that has maximum flow that you can't improve upon. So you could, by porting, improve the flow. The problem there is, how much effort do you want to put into that? If you're a really good head porter and you've been porting for 20 or 30 years, and particularly if you've been porting the kind of head that you're trying to max out and you're really good at it, you can get good results because you now know where the thing, what to do for that particular head. The limitations, the thermactor bump is a problem, the short turn's a problem. If I go too much here, I'm going to go through the water, whatever the issues are in that particular head, because you've cut them apart. Hopefully, all those things about them, and you can go in and maximize that head. What valve job it responds to, how the throat needs to be, if you can go oversized valve, all of that stuff. But most people don't know that. And so if we say, okay, Richard, I want you to test a set of like hand ported heads. Okay, well, that's great. But am I porting them? Are you porting them? Is whoever this guy is, like Vizard or one of these guys that have tested, that have maybe ported 100 of these heads and know what they all do and can get really good numbers out of them? Is it that kind of head? Is it that sort of max effort hand ported head, stock head? Did they do welding in it? Did they raise the port? Did they reshape the chamber? Did they what did they do? Like, at what level is that head at? And that's the problem with, I get a lot of questions about can we port, particularly LS heads. Well, can you just test ported, like hand ported heads? Well, at what level is that? If I just say they're hand ported, then that head test, the results of that head test, are they there for, is that going to represent all hand ported heads? No, certainly not. Because if I port them, they're not going to be very good. If Brian Tooley or Total Engineer Flow or somebody else ports them, they're going to be really good on any of them, on the Ford heads too. They're going to be really good. But you have such a big disparity there. And then the other thing that I wanted to talk about, just touch on porting these stock heads, like how much effort do you want to put into those heads? Like, what is your time worth? So let's say you are really good at porting, and first of all, you're porting an iron head. You're not porting an aluminum head. We're talking about Ford heads right now. So, or a small block Chevy head would be the same kind of thing. Small block Chevy head starts out a little higher, whether you're talking about a Vortec head or a Fuelie head, a 202 valve, 64 cc chamber. It starts out flowing more already. I mean, it's up 30 or 40 CFM above a Ford head anyway. So you could make more power with that just right off the bat. And then you could port it and get more. And so a guy that's doing that work. But the question is, again, it's a stock set of heads. Now you've put, pick your number, 10, 20, 30, 40, 100 hours into it, whatever. And you've reshaped the chamber and it's a one-off thing. And you put titanium valves in or whatever you're going to do, and you spent all this money, and unless it's in a class where you have to run that head, do you really want to put that much time and effort and really that translates into money, even if it's not exact money out of your pocket? Do you want to put that much effort into it where you could just go get another head since there's so many out there for both of those, small block Fords or small block Chevys, and you could just put that on there and because if you can, is it worth it to you to be able to port a stock head and get it to do what an aluminum as-cast trick flow twisted wedge head does? Is that worthwhile? Is that, is it bragging rights? Is it power? What is it? Personally, I don't think I'd spend that kind of time on it. I'd just go get, trick flow heads anymore. But let me know what you guys think. Okay, would you ever try to do a max effort stock iron head? Would you ever try to do max effort stock iron head porting rather than just buy a new set of AFRs? What would you do? Let me know. How low can you go? Knowledge, Tim, Agent, Tommy Cook, TC, Ford versus Chevy head flow. Well, if it's a small block Ford and a small block Chevy, the small block Chevy wins. Because we had more airflow right off the bat for lots of the Chevy heads than any of the Ford heads other than the Cleveland. The Cleveland wins that if we include the Cleveland. But in the Windsor family, the Chevy wins. Chevy also had aluminum heads from the factory available in the L98, and then obviously in the LT1 and the LT4 also. So yeah, I would say that the Chevy wins that and stock head stuff. Again, unless if you're including Cleveland, then Cleveland wins. Maximum effort. Are we talking about Deadpool? That's right. Maximum effort. When you say make this horsepower, do you mean crank or real horsepower? Crank. By the way, my initials are DP. I'm Canadian. Perfect. Does a small cubic inch motor get by with ported standard heads rather than bored and stroke? I don't know what you mean gets by with. Cylinder heads are a lot like a turbo. You should pick the head flow that you need to support the power level that you're at. And the nice thing about cylinder heads is that I would argue, unlike a turbo, if you have a lot more head flow, it's a lot easier to make power, and then you can put a milder camshaft in it to make your head flow. Please do more tests with more stock motors. I usually start out with a stock motor as a baseline for all of this stuff. I don't know what you mean by thoughts, Daniel or Daryl. It's my brother Daryl. It's my other brother Daryl. 862 706 is the best factory head for horsepower and torque. No. The best factory head, the best factory LS head is the rec port head. Well, the LS7 head would be better. It could ultimately make more power, but it doesn't fit on a lot of stuff. And neither one of those, the rec port or the LS7 head or the raise port, fit on a 4.8 or 5.3. And technically, a set of 799s or 243s flow more, so they could support more power. You can go to good, to better, to optimum. 630 horsepower on a 318 LA Mopar by putting aftermarket heads on it, you mean? Jameer, thank you much. Thank you very much. I recently got a Camaro SS. Your channels are making me want power mods that neither my mom nor the state of California like. Live, it's all the way live. Lunchbox. Okay, I have an 04 Mustang GT. All it's done is a tune and a cold air, a spacer. I don't want to have to get into the engine besides cams. Would it even be worth it building? Seth, I always recommend boost on the 2-valve stuff. You could do cams, you could do the ported PI heads or trick flow heads, but that kind of money, a turbo is just going to be, hundreds of horsepower more power. That just popped in my head. Picking up power is easy, putting down power is hard. You gotta pass a certain threshold before that becomes an issue. Been researching and checking your past uploads on the Hooker LS swap turbo manifold setup and not sure that's a good kit to go with. Back to having no idea which direction for an LS swap Fox. We were looking at that one too, but there are others online, others that I think will work. I'm thinking about going not with the Hooker turbo system, but with the Hooker exhaust manifolds, and then just face them forward like we do on the truck manifolds. Ultimately, we could just do the truck manifolds, but the Hooker ones I think probably are better than that. Not that it makes any difference. Maybe lower buck would be the way to go. Just do the truck manifolds and then run a Y pipe in front. Probably offset to one side though, because we're going to have to position the turbo somewhere. What are the best heads to run on LQ4 with your low buck truck cam? I was thinking about 706s. You got to define best. You got to tell me what you're trying to achieve, and then we could steer you in the right direction. There's no best ones. There's no universal best. There's only possibly better choices for achieving specific goals. 799s on a 6-liter flat top, are they good? Yeah, 799s are good heads. All the LS heads are good. You can't pick a bad one. Have an LQ4 317s. I plan 30 over, 4-inch stroke. Okay, 408. I'm looking to try rec port heads and maybe port them from BES instead of cathedral ports. Even stock rec port heads will be a big step up from the 317 heads. So you make quite a bit more power with just rec port heads. And unless you're putting a really big camshaft in there and compression and stuff, I don't know if that you need something more than stock rec port heads. Because are you trying to make more than 600 horsepower with that thing, NA? If you port them, they might not be that good. If Brian ports them, they will be good. But if Sean ports them, they might cause catastrophic damage. Yeah, just don't leave all the material in there after you're done porting. That's why cheese pizza slice was the standard for Dave until his reviews became incredibly biased and unreliable during the past 4 years with his scale. My son likes cheese pizza. I'm more of a pepperoni guy. We just had pizza tonight. Can I use a blower twin turbos on a 427? Yes. And nitrous if you want to do all of that. Trick flow high ports are nice. I've tested those a lot. In fact, those were the first pair of aluminum heads that I put way back when on my 5-liter Mustang. I've seen people port GT40s and do nice. Yeah, and they flow more than a set of obviously stock E7TE heads do. But even GT40s don't flow what a Vortec small block Chevy head flows. Richard, I'm putting my 5.3 turbo setup in my 86 Astrovan. At least I don't think they do. I don't remember them flowing that much. I have all of that data, but man, it's hard to remember 9 million pieces of data. Okay, Richard, I'm putting my 5.3 turbo setup on my 86 Astrovan. I love that. That's awesome. Didn't they make 4-wheel drive versions of that van? Because then that would be cool. I think many port cast iron heads because they can tell people it's a Windsor Junior cast head, but they can't port it to do better and kind of a sleeper effect. Okay. Best plan of action for stock Gen 6 L29 heads for running a 230 cam, springs, rotator eliminators. Needs to fit into the stock valve covers, any machining necessary. I don't know what you're asking. It seems like you have all of the things there that you're going to do. I don't know if anybody has a spring kit that fits that. I'm working on something that might help that, but it's not going to be available for a while. Time is a commodity that you can't buy anymore. That's right. I did a set of 440 Mopar heads back in the day for a guy we sponsored. Get them in the 10s from the mid 11s. That's an application where it definitely should respond to more airflow because those heads are not great stock. I ran out of space. These heads are bolted on an LS1. Daryl, I got to scroll back now, Daryl, and see what you're talking about. Do you remember CNC power heads? I had them for almost 20 years. Yeah, I tested the 882 heads that I did way back, more from the guys at Power Heads. E7T head supposed to flow 217 and 178. I don't think I ever tested their small block Ford heads. I did test some of the small block Chevy heads that they did. I made 430 horsepower, 488 foot-pounds. On what kind of motor? 91 pump gas, T70 at 9 PSI. Okay. I was going to say that the numbers weren't working there, and then I saw the boost. Any chance of doing a collaboration with David at Steve's Dyno? I would love to. I think that'd be fun. Those guys are a lot of fun to hang around. Any hydraulic roller cam recommendations? Small block Ford, 383, 215 heads, RHS, 10.5 to 1 compression. I have lots of 393 stuff up. It depends on what you're wanting to do. I need a little more information rather than straight strip, though. Is it are you give me a power level that you're trying to make? And what is the intake manifold? And what is the transmission? Does it have a converter in it? Maybe use the iron heads best for engines with bores unavailable in the aftermarket aluminum heads. Debate on hand porting LS heads. Take out rocker bolt bump or not. The rocker bolt sticks down into the head port. And so I've seen guys make the bolt shorter, and so that doesn't stick down there. How many good entry level aluminum heads are on the market? I wouldn't waste time porting stock iron ones. Rather have the weight savings. That's the other thing to consider, and that's kind of where I was going when we were talking about this at the beginning. Is it, are you going to put all of that time and effort into your heads, and then those will be your baby? I can understand that, and you want to have them, for your whole life and never share those with anybody because you just put too much effort into it. But they're still iron heads, and they're still much more detonation prone unless you're, doing some chamber softening. But even then, compared to aluminum heads, and they're heavier, and the aluminum heads are lighter, and so there's a lot of stuff on in favor of the aluminum stuff. Do you prefer GT45 or GT35? It depends on what you're trying to achieve, like what power level you're trying to achieve. When you test engines on the stand, I'm assuming that you mean dyno. What type of fuel do you use? I've run all types of different fuels, anywhere from pump, normally 91. I have run 87 on a couple of things because we wanted to see if the combination would run on 87. It's more likely to run on 87 the way that we test it because we test them fairly cold. And so they'll get away with a lot more. But pump gas, race gas, E85. I never run methanol on anything, though. Pepperoni, sausage, and onion. Yeah, all of those are good. I thought you leave the porting metal in the head to make that first startup celebration glitter. That's it. It works better than the BBs that we put through the motors. Many an Astrovan was all-wheel drive. Cool. They use that setup for the Cyclone. Use which setup? Oh, the all-wheel drive one. Okay, that makes sense. An Astrovan was almost a Cyclone Typhoon minus the turbo. Just needs boosting, right? Austin, happy to help. Has anyone tested Iron High's new tall single plane intake for small buck Chevy with a 4500 flange? Comparison to a Super Victor. I've never heard of that, so I don't know anything about it. Jake the Snake, you're running stock 5-liter cylinder heads ported and polished. Stock 5-liter intake with porting on a 331 with a Vortec blower, E303 cam, massive torque, makes for a fun Vox. Yeah, that would be good. Did you extrude hone port the upper lower intake manifold? Did a lot of those back in the day. My dad would always port heads, but he would say, "Son, my hands hurt so bad from porting." It is. It's not good. It's not good for the breathing. It's not good respiration. It's not good for your hands and your back and all of it. It's a lot of work. My hat's off to guys that have done that. .393 has a 5-speed trans, looking to make 500 horsepower. Currently running a big solid roller with bad street characteristics. Do you know what the specs are on the cam that you have in it? But 500 horsepower from a 393 takes no cam at all, really. Let's see where we were. Small block Ford, 351, stroker, 392. So this one made 530. This AFR's on, I'm sure. Yeah, is a 392 or 393. It had an Extreme Energy 282 comp cam and a hydraulic roller. It had a 795 King Demon, airflow research heads, and probably a single plane Victor Jr. kind of intake manifold. Made 531.8 horsepower and 506.9 foot-pounds of torque. That camshaft is a 232 240, if I remember right. Haven't used that camshaft in a long time. But let's go to step into Mr. Wizard's laboratory. 5-liter. 282, 232, 240, 565, 574 on a 112. I don't think that that's the best cam. Probably would pick the XFI camshaft, which is 236, 248, and it would do better than that. But on a motor that's that big with a manual trans, it should be drivable just fine. Hardest part of porting is not rushing to finish toward the end of the job. I get impatient. Yeah, and then the last port is not nearly as good as the one that you took all the time on. Metal shavings, also not good. I would have a pro do the porting of heads, not me. I know Eric wouldn't do iron heads, oh yeah. I read an article you did a while back with basically the same setup on the L29. You said there was improvements to be made to the setup and was curious if you had figured that out yet. I haven't tried it again since then. I haven't spent the time to get a really good spring package. Cut the stock manifold upper and hand ported and welded it back together. Okay. Lower was also hand ported. Cylinder heads had chamber work as well. What cam would you pick for a 331? I wouldn't run that manifold on it. Even in ported form, I wouldn't run that manifold. The manifold's really holding back that combination. Probably not the camshaft. I don't ever do diesel stuff. I mean, I had a Cummins, like an 07 or 08, and we did some stuff on the chassis dyno with it, but we don't run them on the engine dyno. What do you think about 920 heads? 273 from 66 to 67, 318 from 67 to 68, closed chamber, small valve, installed on 318 to maximize torque. The small intake would increase airflow velocity. Well, you can talk about all that, but I have never seen a small valve head that's maximizing velocity ever make more torque than a bigger head. I haven't ever seen that. Certainly not at wide open throttle. 79 small block Chevy 350 heads versus 89 TBI 350 heads. What's better? A 79 is going to be like an 882 or something, right? And I don't know about the TBI stuff. I don't know that I've ever tested those. I don't think that either one of those heads are any good. I think I would pick a Vortec head, or I'd pick an earlier Fuelie head. 799s are good for 5.3s, 5.7s. What off-the-shelf turbo LS kits do you like? I don't like any kits. I don't know. I've never tested kits. I don't have the skill to weld the truck manifold backwards or like the look if I had a choice. What if you have a larger exhaust valve? Exhaust valve, I don't think is where I look for power. I look for intake flow for power. My guess is that small head flows even less than a J head or an X head does. And so my guess is it just makes a lot less power. I think there'd be a significant power gain if some of the tests you were on a freshly built LS versus a junkyard high mileage unit. I don't think so. I think on some of them, like the 4.8 that I did that was broken, that one's down from other ones. Because I've run so many now that I kind of know where a good one is and where a bad one is. So if it's 5 or 10 off from where the rest of the good ones were, I think that's okay. And new ones don't seem to do any more than that. Richard, thanks for taking the time out of your day to help us out. Any Gen 6 or Gen 7 big block content in the works? Yeah, I have the 8.1. I need to run some stuff on that. I just want to put ported heads on the 8.1 and then put a big turbo on it. Turbo 400 doesn't want a shift, and I got fluid all over the garage floor. Uh-oh. What block is better, iron or aluminum for big horsepower? For what engine family are you talking about? Am I the only Gen 4 Chevy big block? No. What is the one I have right now? That's the big bang motor I have. I think it's a Gen 6 right now. But I've had plenty of those. For an LS. So for an LS, you want an aluminum 5.3 or any of the iron motors. And then the last pick would be all the other aluminum motors. All the other aluminum motors, meaning LS1, LS2, LS3, and anything else that would be aluminum other than the 5.3. If I was to go to the junkyard and pick up a 5.3, what are the things I should look out for? The later one, the Gen 4 stuff, is better. And so if you have the choice between a Gen 3 and a Gen 4, pick a Gen 4. An aluminum one is ideal if you can find that. If you can find something that has 799 or 243 heads on it, that usually means it also has flat top pistons, which is good. And then if you can find one that has a Trailblazer SS intake manifold, or if you can go around and piece together that motor, they don't care. Well, they might care, but they wouldn't be able to tell if you did that. The secret to porting is to start with something like a 305 HO head that needs bigger valves and some pocket porting. Okay. 6.2 liter L92 for what? What combo of parts would you pick for a top end for a 331 with 9.5 to 1? The trick flow top end stuff seems to work pretty good. Same thing with the Edelbrock stuff. But I think I would pick either the trick flow stuff, and I might be tempted, depending on how much power I wanted to make, to go with their 11R heads, or an airflow research head is always a really good choice. And then you would just pick the induction system on top of that and the camshaft that you want to whatever kind of power and RPM you want to run. So if you want to run lots of RPM, put a big camshaft in it, as if it will fit your piston to valve clearance. If you got a 331, you have an aftermarket piston in it. So if you have an aftermarket piston, you probably have valve release, so you could put camshaft in it. So then the intake manifold and the camshaft would then determine the personality that you want. Because you have, with an airflow research head, like you put a 185 head on it or something, you have enough head to play with. Do you think high mileage LS don't lose much power versus a fresh one, being the cylinders themselves don't really wear? They don't. I mean, if you look at the L33 that I have, it even has blow by. It's visible on the dyno. You can see it coming out the exhaust. But it's made the most power that I've made out of any of the 5.3s. What cam would you pick between a Lenati Voodoo 270 roller or a bootlegger roller cam, a small block Chevy with stock heads that flow a little less than camel heads? I don't know what the specs are in either one of those cams. Got my car to the point of Schrodinger's subframe. It's able to be easily reversed, but the new subframe is in. All right. Any LS is good, excluding the LS4. And really for the LS4, well, there would be problems with that, I guess. I guess that's accurate. It'll still make power if you put an intake manifold on it, but it's just weird with all the other things that are going on. A lot of newer heads are hard to make better just grinding on them. Yeah, like a Honda head or a Coyote head. What would be the biggest cam to install and still have good low end drivability? You can't have both of those things. You have one or the other of those things on a 6.2. It depends on how much you're willing to put up with, and that's a subjective thing. So we don't know. Like, are you okay with, let's say a stock cam has 21 inches of idle vacuum. Are you okay with 20? Are you okay with 18? Are you okay with 12? Where is your crossover point for that? And where is your crossover point for losing low speed torque? Are you going to use a stock converter? You know, that's going to be a critical element for how big the camshaft can be. The nice thing is you're going to make lots of power with almost any camshaft you put in there compared to a stock one. Aluminum blocks cost more. If you're going to make more than 1,000 horsepower, they can be hurt. Not on a 5.3. I mean, they can be hurt and repaired if you want to do that. But a 5.3 aluminum block will take all of the power. It'll take all of the power that any of the internal components will take. I'm eating green beans and stewing over my failures. LS4, the bell housing mounts and intake are different. Yeah. Free valve. I have 4th gen 6 liter. I saw 60 rotating assembly for 500 on Marketplace. But I just need to bore the 6.0 to make that work. Yes, I don't recommend that, but yeah, you can do that. Michael, the LS4 has the worst stock intake manifold. Yep. I think the heads are decent, though. Well, they're more than just decent. The LS4 has 799s or 243s on it. Have you tested Frankenstein heads? I have not. My guess is those are 350 to 400 CFM heads, I'm guessing, if you're talking about LS3 heads. That takes a lot of motor. I've run stuff like that before when we were doing the LS3 and LS7 like big head shootout. Good evening, Richard. So you're taking aluminum 5. You're saying an aluminum 5.3 will take all the boost. Yeah, the guys that are going really fast in stock bottom end drag racing, that's what they're using. How does a converter affect a turbo, or do you select your torque converter based on your cam? Both of those, because the very best, I was thinking about this today, the very best low speed, the very best camshaft for low speed power is a torque converter. You can't do any better than that. And what the torque converter does, if you go from a 2,000 RPM stall converter to a 3,000 RPM stall converter, you no longer really have to worry about power production from 2,000 to 3,000 RPM. That's an oversimplification. You do a little bit, but now you're in the 3,000 RPM power band where a bigger cam might be coming into play and starting to make decent power. And then therefore it's making more power at 3,000 RPM. Any motor is going to be making more at 3,000 than it does at 2,000. And so at 3,000, now you can spool a turbo better. Richard, I have an L92 that I'm swapping into my 1st gen S10 with a T56. It will be a daily. What cam would you choose? I'll be doing a lot of highway driving. I tend to err on the small side. If you're not taking it to the track and you're not trying to maximize power, one of the cams that I have will work good. BTR has a bunch of good cams for that. Like my low buck truck camshaft, which you're not going to find a better deal on cams than that one, or the Truck Plus, or if you want to make more power, like a red hot cam maybe from BTR. Does lack of vacuum increase crankcase pressure? No, vacuum would decrease crankcase pressure if you apply the vacuum to the crankcase. That's what vacuum pumps do. Is that what you're asking? Is 465 2-inch bore for a 6 liter? Yeah, I wouldn't recommend that. If you're going to try that, then I would recommend strongly that you have the cylinder walls sonic so that you know how thick they are. Because a 6 liter wasn't designed to be taking that far over. And if you make it too thin, it can be problematic. So you don't know if it's going to be too thin unless you check it. And so you got to check. Lots of guys don't do that, and they just do it anyway. They have no idea what it is, and you just eyes these, close these. It's going to work. It's not going to work. I don't know if it's going to work. And it works, and they drive it around. I wouldn't do something like that. They're going to put boost to, though. 6.2s are probably harder to find than 5.3s or 6.0s. Yeah, I've not seen a 6.2 in the wrecking yard. Is there a difference between measuring valve duration at the valve versus at the lobe? The used cam I found is 215 at 50, but at the lobe. The cam spec should be at the lobe. People look at me funny when I say the torque converter helps spool the turbo. Yeah. Do you think the turbo would spool better at 3,000 RPM, starting at 3,000 RPM rather than starting at 2,000 RPM? The answer is almost always yes. I have a set of 781 heads, bigger stainless valves, and port work in the machine shop right now. What size big block are you putting that on? Maybe I should get another 6-liter rotating assembly because it will most definitely be boosted. Anything I have will be boosted. You don't need to make the motor any bigger if you're running boost on it. That's not a consideration. Your 6-liter, as we've shown, can go to, you can go to 2,000 horsepower if you wanted to do that. You can easily, making the power is never the problem with that. You're going to have so many other problems that, oh, I got to make a stroker out of it. I got to bore it. I got to do whatever. You don't have to do any of that. You just have to go, hey, look, here's another pound of boost. I just made a stroker. I just made a 6.2 out of my 6.0. And it's so much easier to do. Just it's one more pound away from being all those things. I got lucky and pulled an L92 from an Escalade. That's really good. 781 head, Ziski 280, 468 with flat tops. That'd be cool. Keeping the heads down is a problem. No, I wouldn't say that is either. Making the power is really easy. Making 4-digit power levels with Turbo LS is really, really simple. But is your transmission a 4-digit power level transmission? And your drive shaft and your rear end and your tires and your brakes and your driving talent and your tuning and all that? On a 544 valve, the cam specs say the LSA is 114. Is it not a bad thing if I change the LSA to 108? How would you know if it's a bad thing or not? The only way you'd know is if you test it. And if it's a double overhead cam, you can adjust the LSA because you can change that point. You can change that measurement by altering the cams. Are you gonna change the intake cam or you change the exhaust cam? You know, you can play with cam timing and see if it works. You don't know if it's going to work until you test it, though. 6.2 rotating assembly is only $500, and I can get it machined for cheap. I can't find a good 6.0 rotating assembly cheap. Is why I was considering it. Okay, but is the 6.2 rotating assembly just a stock one? Because if it's just a stock one, all you're getting is another stock rotating assembly. Don't you already have a rotating assembly in the motor that you have, at least a stock one? 2,000 horsepower in a 460. I don't think it would spool up even once. I think that the 460 would be going, whoa, 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 hey, hang on. We're putting it in neutral. That's our default safety switch. We're going to all neutrals. Full neutral all the time. That's the default setting. You get a neutral. You get a neutral. Everybody gets a neutral. All the gears. Didn't think of changing them individually. That's probably the way to go, though. Well, if you're trying to get it all with one cam, then all you're doing is either advancing or retarding the intake or advancing or retarding the exhaust. So, but you, like I said, there might be a sweet spot where you move both of them. You may be spinning your wheels and not do anything. You may change the power and improve power down low. You may hurt the power at the top, vice versa, whatever. You don't know. That's the nice thing about having it be like the Coyote, where you just go, okay, I'm going to try this cam timing. I'm just going to try this cam timing, this one. With a regular mod motor, you got to put gears in and go in and make a whole bunch of pulls. Any 4200 videos? Yeah, there's a couple up there. Have you had success burping a floor jack? Pittsburgh jack no longer has the power or ability to lift well. Burped it years ago, and I have hydraulic fluid. Do you think it has air in it? And I don't think I've ever tried that. Is installing LS3 intake valves into an L92 head make a big difference weight-wise? Or is it just max effort at that point? Well, it could help if you want RPM, because the valve is going to be lighter, but otherwise you're not going to see a difference in power, I wouldn't think. I don't want anything, Owen. The stock 6-cylinder assembly I have has one bent rod, and the crank is pretty bad. Okay. Replace the seals. Yeah, I don't know if a bad seal allows you to get air in the system, but the seal stops it from building pressure, though. Can I ask some carburetor questions? Yes. My 3310, the secondaries locked out, falls on its face when I stab the throttle. Accelerator pump is adjusted correctly. All gaskets and diaphragm is new. I don't know what you mean by the secondaries locked out. Are you not operating the secondaries? Are you just running it as a 2-barrel? Or are you, instead of having them be vacuum secondary operated, you have them mechanically operated? So I don't know which one of those you're talking about. Calvin has done some stuff with the Atlas. Yeah, he does. He's done a lot of cool stuff. You can buy an intake sprocket that has offset key drives for different advance or retards. But yeah, I've seen those. They have those for most import applications too. They used to sell, Tim, they used to sell seal kits for a lot of them, like the Allied ones that we would get from Harbor Freight. They used to sell seal kits for them. I don't know if they still do. I think now a lot of those guys may have stopped doing that because they're just like, you just need to buy another jack. I want to get a nice aluminum jack, because that dragging that, I've had that Harbor Freight one for probably since 93, I think. So for a long time. Such a thing as a cam that performs similar to a BTR hot rod cam that does not chop. No, a cam that makes power like that is going to have some sort of idle quality. My Harbor Freight jack lives in the rain. It's louder than my car when I move it. It is. Those steel wheels are just awful. And it's like trying to lift it up into the truck or something. They're just unrealistically heavy. The secondaries arm locked with a screw, so they open at a quarter throttle. Okay, so you're opening them mechanically then, right? So when you open the secondaries, do the secondaries have a cam on them? Do they have a squirter in it? And is it a lean bog or a rich bog? I have a big red from 92. First liar never stands a chance. Can really cold air intake temperatures offset high boost in a smaller engine like a 5.3 versus a 6.0 at the same power level? Can really cold air intake temps offset high boost in a smaller engine? I don't know what comparison you're trying to make there. Colder air will make more power, if that's your question. And really cold air will make a lot more power. So if you, like, for instance, if you run ice water in something, that's really good. If you run 0-degree air into your motor, you can do all sorts of crazy things. The 24 Silverado, the 6.2. I don't know much about the engine. It's my first Chevy. I use it to pull 2-horse trailers, and it's been fantastic. Yeah, that's an LT based motor in a 24. I have a 12-year-old 3-ton Harbor Freight jack I've used to pick up my GM 2500 HD. Had the Harbor Freight aluminum 1.5-ton jack for 10 years now, no problems, except for it needs to have all the bolts holding it together tightened up every once in a while. I've seen that stuff. Iron jacks are like manual steering exercise before going to the gym. Yeah, it is. It's pretty beefy. Seems to get heavier every year. And my Harbor Freight jack, we lost the extension arm off of it. So now it only has the short arm section. So it's a pain. I like a Steely's for drifting. You can slide around, especially a smooth, like shop floor. So you can do the Tokyo drift with it. You can buy them a 17x9 plus 5, and they're $160 Canadian or Australian rather. Got a 454, 781 heads to the 70 LS6 cam solid flat tap. I want 500 horsepower. Will work. That camshaft should be big enough to do that. That's not a great cam. If it's a newer version, a modern version of that, like Comp has, their muscle car cams or whatever, that's going to be better than the original LS6 camshaft is. But an LS6 camshaft is a pretty big camshaft. At least the duration numbers are pretty good size. Upside of really cold air, make more power. Downside, my tires become plastic. Yeah, it cold air for inside the engine cures all kinds of problems. Anyone swap a 4L60 with a 6L80? Probably lots of guys have done that. Adam, I don't know what you mean by what are my thoughts. There's a place in Houston has put 10 L90s behind an LS. Exactly. We don't need no stinking thoughts. Would you ever try to do max effort stock iron head porting rather than buy a new set of AFRs? That's interesting. 55% are saying no. I expected most people to say no, but we got a lot more yeses than I thought. Way to go, guys. Way to go. Thoughts, opinion. Even opinion, I think, is too general. I just want a specific question. That's all I'm asking. Finally getting rid of the 16.5-inch rims on my van. Got a new set of steel black powder coated 16s. Still got to use my 10-ply radials. So 16.5, that seems like an odd size for a wheel. Yes, guys must not have ported iron heads. That's probably true. Probably anybody that's actually done iron head porting, which I have done some of that. I did I think I may have only done one chamber. Does that count? On the L67 six-cylinder heads. 1975 Dodge factory rims. What a weird size, huh? What cheap valve spring removal tool would you recommend for LS? We'll have those up on the site in just I don't know, a week or two probably. Yeah, I've seen guys make their own, and you can do that. I have a 20-year-old Sears 3-ton that has spent 10 years outside. I know mine's not treated well. It sits out in the rain. Still list my diesel F250. Nice. Bridgeport 13B. That's what you want to port? I want to port a set of iron heads with a Dremel. Never again. It's difficult to type flow data and my question in this chat. Can you give me a rough idea? Scrolling. Is a 200 shot on a plate get too much for a bolt-on LS1? We've run 300s on them, but if you put ring gap in it, probably fine. I think Matt Happel did a video making a spring removal tool. I've seen some fairly clever ones where guys use, I've seen them weld wrenches together and all kinds of stuff. To me, that seems like that's not any. I mean, sure, you have those laying around. Maybe you have a bunch of extra wrenches, which a lot of guys normally do. If you have toolboxes, you've already bought multiple sets of wrenches to replace other stuff or damaged them or bent them or whatever. And I've seen guys weld and bend wrenches to fit different things. And so if you take an open end wrench, two of them, and cut them and weld them together, you've made spring compressors that allow you to have access. And then you just make another plate that with the screw that pushes stuff down. It's not really hard to do. I'll wait and get your valve spring tool. We're going to have that and a damper puller also. I'm porting old Ford small block head because I collected them and now feel guilty throwing them away. So you feel if you put some extra effort into them, they'll be worth more. Guys are actually interested at 500 to 700 horse or $700 level for fresh guides, porting, resurface. That is a good deal. I started hand porting 20 years ago. Now I work with granite. I think I might get a job rebuilding heads when I retire. Cool. That's a good retirement option. If a 5.3 took 25 psi to make 1,000 horsepower, okay, I'd be really disappointed if it took that much boost. But I'm with you. And the 6.0 only took 16 psi. But having really cold inlet temperature offset the heat that the 5.3 will make with a higher boost level. It's not heat that you're worried about, because the heat is not why a 5.3 took 25 pounds. The reason that it took 25 pounds is because the naturally aspirated 5.3 made less naturally aspirated power than the 6-liter did. The 6-liter only took 16 pounds because it was making a lot more NA power. As to the heat, a lot of that is going to be taken out from cooling from an intercooler. Because if you're running 25 pounds, you're running an intercooler. If you're running 16 pounds, you should run an intercooler. So both of them are going to be intercooled. So the discharge temperature going into the motor is going to be a lot closer than it was coming out of the turbo. If one of those has hot air going into the turbo, like the 6-liter, and the 5.3 has cold air, that will be beneficial. Or if you have ice water on the 5.3, that will be beneficial. I've got an HF valve string tool. Won't do much more than small displacement motorcycles. Flexes way too much. I've seen those. Have you ever done any BMW inline 6 development work? I have not. I've owned a few of those, but we didn't do any performance stuff for them. Both of them were my wives. Do you have any experience with old Chevy inline 6s? Yeah, I have a 292 Chevy. Basic porting, yes. Max effort, no. If I have budget to max effort port, I will start out with a better head. There you go. Dang it. Steve, what's the address to your shop? I don't have a shop. We have an online store where we have LS stuff. And it's richardholdnerperformance.com. I just picked up a 68 C20 today. What motor's in it? What motor's in the C20? Or does it have one in it? Does it need one in it? It's either a 250 or 292. Okay. They're good, stout little motors for, not making very much power and not having a lot of RPM and just driving around and being truck motors. Yeah, drag van. I would be surprised if they're not lighter. Have you ever done any experiments, or do you have any experience with a ProCharge 5.7 Vortex? I don't know what you mean by Vortex. Are you meaning the LS, or you're meaning the pre-LS stuff? We've run ProChargers on small block Chevys, if that's what you're talking about, a lot. My 67 C20 had a 307. Yeah, the website is richardholdnerperformance.com. Christopher wants to know if the 67 C20 has drum brakes on it. 67, my brother's Firebird was a 67. It had drums front and back. Manual drums times 4. Yep, 4-wheel drum. Drum on drum action. Got 1 more minute. Whoa. Do you ship internationally? I think that they do. 307 Chevy needs a 274 cam and some boost. It does. But all the 307 guys can look down their noses at the 305 guys, right? Is it possible to get 480 CFM from ported Hellcat heads? The Gen 3 Performance Victory 5 billet aluminum Hemi complete cylinder heads with raised exhaust ports seem extremely expensive. I've never seen a Hemi head that goes to 480 CFM, but I'm not around any of that sort of race stuff. The billet head, does it have water passages? Is it just a race head? Did you find the video of the van? I said I did not. Brake fade from drums is fun. Have you run any ATM carbs? What's an ATM carb? TFS 220 as-cast heads with smaller camshaft. Or 706 ported head, stock valves, larger camshaft, stock bottom end, 4.8. So I'll give you an idea. We have that L33 5.3 liter, same crankshaft as the LQ4, and the dish piston, and we have a flat top piston in the 5.3. That doesn't matter because the piston to valve clearance is the same on both of those pistons because the dish the valve hits an area where there's not dish. So we've run those 220 as-cast heads. Ours have been ported, and we also milled them 30. And we have run the Brian Tooley Stage 4 LS3 camshaft. So we have you got a fair bit of room. A 706, I think a 220 head is going to be. I don't think a 220 head flow. A 220 head doesn't flow as much as a max effort 706 head from Total Engine Airflow. So if that answers your question. I like how 307 isn't highly looked at, but in the Ford world, the 302 is good. 305 are good for better heads to pop on a 307. I don't know if it turns over. 67 might be 456 gears. Let's see. I got to get through these. I got to get going. Have an 06 LS2 243 heads. Been listening to you for a while. Think you want a turbo it now. Any suggestions? 800 wheel horsepower. Yeah, all you have to do is put ring gap in it and a cam and the right size turbo, and you're good to go. If you're on ice water, then you could potentially lower the boost level it would take without the ice water. Correct. Yes, it will make more power with a colder charge air. And so if you wanted to make the same power, you could lower the boost. Try stopping a 6,000-pound van from 90 miles an hour. That's not good. How do you put a carburetor on a fuel-injected Chevy 350? You take all the fuel injection manifold off. You put on an inexpensive dual-plane intake manifold, put a regular distributor in it, and then put a carburetor on it. The ATM carb is... What is an ATM carb? How come I've never heard of that? ATM innovation. Huh. 706 ported by AFR flows more than trip flow as-cast 220. Not AFR doesn't port 706 heads. Total Engine Airflow does. Now you need to do a video on ATM carbs. Well, I'm gonna have to go look up and see what an ATM carburetor is. I've never even heard of it. I guess I'm out of the loop. I'm no longer relevant. I'm not ATM certified. I will see you guys all tomorrow.